The text from my neighbor Sandra arrived at 2:47 on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was standing in line at the pharmacy waiting to pick up my prescription for iron supplements. "Honey, just saw your husband carrying grocery bags into your MIL's apartment building. Thought you should know. Didn't you say he wasn't getting paid this month?" I read it 3 times, each pass leaving my mouth drier than the one before, because Daniel had told me, very clearly over our kitchen table with those steady brown eyes of his that I had trusted for 9 years, that the project had fallen through, that there was no paycheck coming in October, and that we needed to be careful. He had said it with the tired, earnest gravity of a man who was genuinely sorry to deliver difficult news, and I had believed him the way I always believed him, without hesitation, the way you believe someone whose honesty you have never had reason to question. We had been so careful. I had skipped the hair appointment I had been saving toward since August. I had canceled our anniversary dinner reservation at the Italian place on Marble Street and replaced it with a bottle of wine and pasta at home. I had transferred $200 from my personal emergency fund to cover the utility bills because, as Daniel had explained with a tired, apologetic slope to his shoulders, his freelance invoices had been delayed again, and the math only worked if we were both pulling in the same direction. And yet there was my husband. In the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, he had told me he was spending at the public library, researching freelance opportunities, carrying grocery bags into his mother's apartment building. Sandra's message had a photo attached. I almost didn't open it. My thumb hovered over the small thumbnail for what felt like a very long time. The fluorescent pharmacy lights buzzing above me, the woman ahead of me negotiating a coupon with patient, immovable determination. When I finally tapped the image, it expanded across my screen. Daniel in his gray wool coat, the one I had bought him for his birthday 2 Februaries ago, the one that had cost more than I usually spent because I had wanted him to have something good, something that would last. His arms loaded with what looked like 5 large shopping bags, the kind from the nicer grocery stores on the west side, the ones that come in forest green and cost $3 each and are always full of things like artisan bread and good cheese and the particular brand of olive oil that Eleanor preferred. He was walking through the glass doors of Riverside Gardens, his mother's building, and he was smiling at something just past the camera's frame, his posture easy and relaxed in a way I had not seen from him in months. I stared at that photograph for a long time. Then I paid for my supplements and walked to my car. I want to tell you that I had a feeling that some deep animal instinct had been whispering to me for months, building slowly beneath the ordinary surface of our days, and that Sandra's message was simply the moment the whisper became a scream. But the honest truth is that I did not see the full shape of it coming, not the architecture of what had been built behind my back, not the careful, deliberate construction of it, not the number of hands involved. I had noticed things, small things, the kind you fold up and tuck away in the back of your mind because the alternative, believing what they might actually mean, is too large and too ugly to look at directly. Daniel was a good man. Eleanor was difficult, but not dangerous. I was probably just tired and anxious and reading too much into ordinary moments. That is what I told myself. For a very long time, through the better part of a year that I cannot get back, that is what I chose to believe. Our life before all of this was, by most measures, a genuinely good one. Daniel and I had met at a mutual friend's housewarming party 11 years earlier, in a cramped kitchen that smelled of mulled wine and fresh paint, and I had fallen in love with his steadiness before I had even learned his last name. He was the kind of man who remembered to call his grandmother on her birthday without being reminded, who kept his car clean without being asked, who could sit in comfortable silence for hours without making the air feel heavy. I was 28 then, working my way up through the administrative chain at Callaway & Associates, a mid-sized property management company where I had started as a receptionist and grown, by careful degrees, into a senior accounts manager overseeing 3 of the company's larger residential portfolios. I was not rich, but I was careful with money and diligent at my job, and I had spent 4 years building a savings account that held, among other things, a small inheritance from my grandmother Rosalie, $18,000 I had never touched, sitting in a separate account like a quiet promise I had made to my younger self. That money felt important in a way I couldn't fully explain. It was the only thing in my life that was entirely, unambiguously mine. Daniel and I married 3 years after that kitchen party in a small ceremony at the botanical garden near his childhood home. His mother, Eleanor, wore a cream-colored dress that was 3 shades too close to white, and when I caught her standing beside me in a photograph at the reception, her expression arranged into something that could only be described as tolerant, I had laughed it off the way you do when you are happy, and the world feels generous. My own mother, watching from across the room with a glass of champagne she had been nursing for an hour, pressed her lips together in that particular way she had, the way that meant she was choosing her words, and said very quietly into my ear, "That woman is going to be a project, Clara." I had kissed her cheek and told her not to worry. Eleanor Marsh was 63 when we married, recently widowed. Daniel's father, Robert, had died of a heart attack 2 years before our wedding, and she carried her grief with the same composed precision she brought to everything else. She was always impeccably dressed, pressed slacks, silk blouses, and muted tones of dove gray and sage, her silver hair cut in a bob so precise it seemed lacquered into place. She volunteered at the hospital gift shop on Thursdays. She attended the 11 o'clock service at St. Michael's on Sundays. She made very good pie crust and was not above mentioning it. She also had opinions, thorough, well-considered opinions, about the neighborhood Daniel and I had chosen to rent in, about the fact that we were renting at all, about the paint color in our bathroom, about the temperature at which I stored red wine, about the way I had assembled Daniel's birthday cake, which she had arrived early enough to witness and comment upon, with a smile that stopped precisely at the corners of her mouth. Oh, Clara, that's a lovely effort. She never said anything overtly cruel. She was far too precise for that. Every remark came wrapped in the language of family and love, in a tone of gentle concern, and if you tried to explain to anyone exactly what it felt like to be on the receiving end of an afternoon with Eleanor, you would sound paranoid, irrational, emotional. That last word in Eleanor's vocabulary was deployed like a scalpel, quiet, precise, and designed to cut something essential in the person it landed on. For the first 3 years of our marriage, I kept the peace with the devotion of someone who believes that peace, kept long enough, eventually becomes real. I invited Eleanor to Sunday dinners she arrived 35 minutes early for, which meant I was always still cooking when she walked through the door, and she was always, in some indefinable way, already ahead of me. I sent her birthday cards selected with excessive care. I bit my tongue at Thanksgiving when she quietly rearranged my serving dishes and murmured to Daniel, in a voice calibrated to be just barely audible, that she had always worried about his cholesterol. I was a good daughter-in-law, patient and warm and willing, and if I sometimes found myself breathing more slowly and deliberately on the drive home from Riverside Gardens, if the tight knot between my shoulder blades didn't begin to loosen until we were several miles away, well, that was just family. Everyone had difficult family. I was probably just sensitive. The first sign that something had shifted, that the ordinary friction had become something with sharper edges, came in February, about 8 months before Sandra's message arrived. Daniel had been let go from the architectural firm where he'd worked for 6 years. Not fired, he was careful to specify, laid off, part of a larger round of budget realignment. And while he had been quiet and bruised about it in the way men of his background sometimes are when work is taken from them, he had also been practical. He updated his portfolio. He reached out to contacts. He took on 2 small freelance contracts that paid adequately and kept him structured. I was not frightened. We had savings. We had my salary, which had grown steadily as I moved into a senior role. We were going to be fine. But somewhere around April, Daniel had started to seem less fine in ways I couldn't quite name. The freelance contracts finished, and the new projects he mentioned in passing. A website redesign, something with a restaurant group downtown, did not seem to be materializing into invoices or scheduled work. He spent long hours at the desk in our second bedroom, but when I passed the half-open door, his screen was often dark or showing something inconsequential. He started volunteering to run errands at odd hours, mid-morning on weekdays, early afternoons when I was on work calls. He began answering his phone in the hallway when Eleanor called, stepping out with a small, apologetic smile and pulling the door most of the way shut behind him. Eleanor had started calling more frequently that spring, 3 times a week, then 4, then sometimes daily. And the calls I could partially overhear always seemed to end with Daniel's voice dropping into a register I associated with reassurance and promises. "I know, Mom, I know, I'm working on it." Working on what, exactly? I did not ask. That is one of the things I have had to sit with in the months since all of this unraveled. The questions I didn't ask, the moments I deliberately looked away from. By September, I had started keeping a notebook. Dates, amounts, explanations Daniel had offered that didn't quite reconcile. The joint account was consistently lower at the end of each month than it should have been given our expenses. There were charges from the West Side grocery store on weeks I hadn't been there, from wine shops near Eleanor's building, from a home goods store on Carver Street. There was a charge on the 8th of October, 3 days before Sandra's photo, of $217 at a flooring company whose website showed beautiful wide plank hardwood in colors named Driftwood and Morning Harvest. I had written it in my notebook and stared at it and told myself there was probably an explanation. I kept waiting for Daniel to offer one. He did not. Still, I did not ask. It was Sandra who had broken it open with 3 sentences and a photograph. I called her back from the pharmacy parking lot, still sitting in the driver's seat with the prescription bag on the seat beside me. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear in the careful way she said my name that she had been wondering if I would call, sitting with the small guilt of someone who has done the right thing and isn't yet sure it was. I told her I was glad she had sent it. I asked her to describe exactly what she had seen. He had been coming out of the parking garage attached to Riverside Gardens, she said, the one where Eleanor had a reserved space she'd let Daniel use since his father died. And he had been on his phone, talking and laughing, and by her count he was carrying 5 or 6 bags, the large green kind, and he had gone in through the main entrance and the door had closed behind him. She was sorry if it caused trouble, she said. She just thought I should know. I thanked her. I told her she had done exactly the right thing. After I hung up, I sat in the car for another 10 minutes, watching people come and go through the pharmacy doors, ordinary people living ordinary Tuesday afternoons, and I thought about all the Tuesdays I had spent believing I was doing the same. I drove home in a state I can only describe as suspended, not panicked, not calm, but hovering in some middle place where my hands worked the wheel by muscle memory, while something cold and certain settled at the base of my throat. I let myself into the apartment and stood in the kitchen for several minutes, listening to the refrigerator hum and watching late afternoon light move across the floor in pale rectangles. The apartment smelled like the rosemary candle I had lit that morning. The grocery list was still on the fridge in my handwriting, spare and frugal. Eggs, rice, the cheap pasta we had been eating more of lately. Our budget, our careful, reduced life. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint banking portal and read October's transactions, each charge lining up with stores near Eleanor's building, near the West Side grocery stores, near the home goods shop she had mentioned wanting to visit. Then I walked to Daniel's desk drawer, the one in the home office, the one I had never opened before because it was his space, and I had respected that because I had always respected his space. And I opened it. The drawer held the ordinary archaeology of a man's working life. Pens, a USB drive, a charging cable, a notebook with architecture sketches from a project years ago. Beneath the notebook was a brown folder, standard, the kind you buy in boxes of 25, labeled in Daniel's precise handwriting, Mom, Reno. My hands were very still as I opened it. My heart was not still at all. It was loud, filling my ears with a rushing sound, as though I had stepped off a high place and was still waiting to understand whether I had fallen or flown. The folder contained 7 pages. The first was a printed estimate from a contractor, dated 6 weeks earlier, for the full renovation of Eleanor's apartment, Unit 4C, Riverside Gardens, including new hardwood flooring throughout, kitchen cabinet refinishing, new appliances, and paint. The total, circled in Daniel's pen, was $22,400. The next pages were itemized receipts I recognized from our joint accounts transaction history. The grocery runs, the wine, the home goods, the flooring deposit. Our money. The 6th page was a bank statement for an account I did not recognize, at a bank we had never used, under the names Daniel R. Marsh and Eleanor C. Marsh. The balance, as of September 30th, was $41,262. I read that number 3 times. Then I turned to the 7th page, which was a wire transfer record, and I began to understand exactly where $41,000 had come from. The wire transfer record was dated August 14th, a single transaction initiated from an account number I recognized immediately. The last 4 digits were burned into my memory, had been for years, because I had typed them so many times into the bank's login portal, checking the balance the way you check on something sleeping, making sure it was still there, still safe. It was my grandmother Rosalie's account, my inheritance. The account I had told Daniel about only once, early in our marriage, in one of those late-night conversations where you hand someone the most tender parts of yourself and trust them to be careful with them. I had told him the balance. I had told him what it meant to me. I had told him I didn't intend to touch it unless something truly necessary demanded it. $18,000, sitting quietly at Hartwell Savings and Loan, where my grandmother had kept her money for 40 years before she died and left it to me. The transfer, dated August 14th, was for $14,000. The destination account was the one in Eleanor's and Daniel's names. I sat on the floor of the home office. I don't remember deciding to sit down. One moment I was standing at the desk with the folder in my hands, and the next moment I was on the floor with my back against the desk, the papers in my lap, the room very still around me. $14,000. He had taken $14,000 from my personal account, the account that required only my signature, that was mine alone, and moved it into a secret account shared with his mother, and used it, along with money siphoned from our joint account over months, to renovate Eleanor's apartment in Riverside Gardens. And I had been eating cheap pasta. I had been canceling hair appointments. I had been transferring money from my emergency fund to cover utility bills while thanking him for his honesty about our financial situation. When I heard his key in the front door lock, I did not move immediately. I listened to the familiar sequence of sounds: the door, the shoes, the jangle of keys on the hook, the refrigerator opening. And I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth and thought, you have 2 choices. You can cry, or you can be very, very quiet and very, very clear. I chose quiet. I chose clear. I stood up, smoothed my clothes, closed the folder, and walked into the kitchen. Daniel was standing at the refrigerator with one hand on the door and a look of mild exhaustion on his face that I had once found endearing. He looked up when I came in, and I watched his face arrange itself into its ordinary evening expression, a small, tired smile. I set the folder on the counter between us. I placed Sandra's photograph on top of it, face up. I did not say anything. I watched him look at it. I watched the smile dissolve. I watched his hand tighten on the refrigerator door and then release, and in his eyes I saw the thing I had been most afraid to see. Not surprise, but the particular, nauseating clarity of someone who has been caught and knows it. "Clara," he said. "Just my name." "How much is in that account?" I asked. My voice was very even, which surprised me. "The account at Hartwell, with your name and your mother's name on it." He looked at the folder. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the wall. "I was going to tell you," he said finally. "When?" I said. "After the floors were finished? After the cabinets?" He said nothing. His hands went into his coat pockets, which was something he did when he was stalling, searching for a version of events he could offer without fully surrendering. I had watched him do it 100 times over 9 years. I had always let him get there. "It's not what you think," he said. "Then tell me how $14,000 left my grandmother's account and ended up in an account I didn't know existed, with your mother's name on it." The silence that followed was the longest I had ever sat in. He had gone pale. "Mom needed the renovation," he said finally. "The floors were damaged. The kitchen hadn't been updated since Dad died. She was struggling, Clara. I couldn't just—" "You couldn't just ask me," I said. "You could not look at me and say, 'Mom needs help. Can we figure this out together?' You chose to take $14,000 from my personal account instead." "I knew you'd say no," he said, and I believe he thought this was a defense, that his prediction of my refusal justified what he had done. "You've never made any real effort when it comes to my mother." "This is not about effort," I said, and the quietness in my voice had taken on a temperature by then, something past cold. "This is about the fact that you accessed my personal account without my consent. How did you do it, Daniel? That account requires my signature." He looked at the counter for a long moment. "I had the login information," he said finally, "from when you needed me to check the balance that one time, 2 years ago. I wrote it down." He said it carefully, as though the carefulness of his tone might cushion what the words actually meant. "You stole from me," I said. "Say it. I need you to say the word." He didn't say it. He looked at his hands and he did not say it. And in the silence where the word should have been, I understood something I had been trying not to understand for the better part of a year. His silence was not weakness. It had always been a choice. Every time he stepped into the hallway to take his mother's calls, every receipt he hadn't mentioned, every explanation left to dissolve before I could examine it, none of it had been the passive drift of a man struggling to balance competing loyalties. He had decided, at some point I could not precisely identify, that his mother's comfort was worth more than my trust, and he had decided I did not need to know he had made that decision. I picked up my phone and called Eleanor. She arrived 40 minutes later, impeccably dressed even at that hour. Slate blue blouse, gray trousers, pearl earrings, with the unhurried bearing of someone who has prepared herself for a negotiation. She looked at the pages spread on the counter, and then at me, and I saw something cross her face I had never seen there before. Not guilt, but the expression of someone recalculating a position she had assumed was unassailable. "We were going to tell you," she said immediately, and the seamlessness with which she and Daniel arrived at the same opening line told me everything about the degree of coordination between them. We simply needed the initial work underway before things became unnecessarily complicated. Before I noticed the money was gone, I said, "Clara." She settled into the kitchen chair at the end of the table, my chair, the one I always sat in, with the ease of someone who has given herself permission to be comfortable in a space that isn't hers. I am a 68-year-old widow on a fixed income, and my son was trying to help me. Surely you can understand. "We're family," I said, before she could say it herself. "I know. I've heard that phrase for 9 years. It's the sentence that comes just before something is taken that I didn't agree to give." She blinked. "Tell me about the listing, Eleanor." A silence. The pearl earrings glinted under the kitchen light. "I don't know what Daniel—" "Tell her," Daniel said suddenly from the doorway. Eleanor and I both looked at him. He was standing with one hand on the doorframe, and his face had changed. The constructed expression had slipped, and underneath was something exhausted and frightened. "Tell her about the agent," he said. "Tell her what you were planning to do after the renovation." Eleanor's chin lifted precisely 1 degree. "Daniel, this is not—" "She was planning to sell the apartment," he said to me, and his voice carried the particular clarity of a man who has decided that if he is going to be caught, he will at least have the dignity of delivering the news himself. "The market in that neighborhood has gone up significantly. She had a real estate agent contact her 8 months ago. She was going to complete the renovation, list the apartment, take the profit, and relocate to a less expensive area. And she was going to set some of the sale proceeds aside." He looked at his shoes. "For me." She called it a foundation, a financial foundation. I looked at Eleanor. She was looking at Daniel with controlled fury she was almost, but not quite, managing to contain. "That money," I said slowly, "would have been generated partly by a renovation funded with $14,000 of my grandmother's inheritance. Money you planned to use without ever telling me. Profit you were going to collect without my knowledge. A private arrangement between you and my husband that I would have discovered, if I discovered it at all, only after everything was already done." I stood up from the table. "That's not a family decision. That's fraud." The word landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a height. Daniel closed his eyes. Eleanor set down her cup with a small, precise click. "I think," she said carefully, "that you are being very emotional right now, and that perhaps this conversation would be more productive in the morning when—" "I spoke to a lawyer this afternoon," I said. I had not spoken to a lawyer. I had sat on the office floor and made tea I didn't drink, but the decision formed fully as I said it, and I knew it was the right one, and I watched Eleanor's composure recalibrate in the silence that followed. "I'd like you to leave now," I said. "Both of you. Tonight." Eleanor left first. She walked through the front door with her chin at exactly the right angle, and her pearl earrings glinting in the hall light, and she did not say goodbye. Daniel packed a bag in 7 minutes and stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment before he left. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he said. "I believe the sorrow was genuine. But sorrow is not the same as it not having happened, and I had learned that evening that the distinction matters enormously." I called my father at 9:30. He listened to the entire story without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "What do you need?" Not "I told you so." Not "I never trusted him." Just "What do you need?" I told him I needed a lawyer, and he said he'd make a call in the morning. I told him I thought I was going to be okay, and he said he suspected that too. Patricia Howe, the lawyer my father connected me with, was a compact, precise woman with the manner of someone who had heard every version of every story and found all of them equally clarifying. She told me the unauthorized access to my personal account was actionable, that digital credentials obtained without consent and used to initiate a transfer constituted financial fraud. She told me the hidden joint account, the contractor arrangement, and the planned property sale created a pattern of financial misconduct that would be highly relevant in any proceedings. She told me I had a strong case. I left her office 2 hours later with a folder of my own, thicker than Daniel's, and I went home and slept for the first time in 4 nights. The settlement, when it came, was not dramatic. There was no courtroom, no public scene. What there was, instead, was a legally binding agreement requiring the full restitution of $14,000 to my personal account, the dissolution of the secret joint account, and complete financial disclosure in divorce proceedings. The contractor returned the deposit when presented with documentation of the fraudulent funding. Eleanor's renovation stopped with the kitchen half-finished and flooring materials sitting in boxes in her entryway. She did not speak to me again. Daniel and I were officially divorced 7 months after the evening I spread 7 pages of evidence across the kitchen counter. I kept the apartment. I recovered my grandmother's money, restored to its full balance with interest that Patricia had argued, successfully, was owed. I lost my marriage and the version of my life I had spent 9 years building toward, and I lost the man I had believed Daniel to be, which was, in the end, the sharpest loss, because grief for something that never quite existed is a particular and confusing kind of grief, and I had not known that before. Sandra brought me soup twice in the weeks after Daniel left, and she seemed to carry a quiet guilt about having sent that message, as though she had caused what she had only revealed. I corrected her gently every time. "You did not cause this," I told her. "You only showed me what was already there." She seemed to take some comfort in that eventually. My father came to stay for a long weekend in November, and we watched old films, and he fixed the kitchen tap that had been dripping for months, and he did not mention Daniel or Eleanor, except once, briefly, when he looked at me across the dinner table and said, "Your grandmother would have been proud of you, Clara." I had to go to the kitchen for a few minutes before I could come back and respond. The weeks after Daniel left moved in a rhythm that was strange, and then familiar, and then, slowly, something I did not want to give back. The apartment was mine in a way it had never fully been before. I rearranged the furniture. I cooked whatever I wanted for dinner without considering someone else's preferences or schedule. I left books open on the kitchen table overnight, and they were still there in the morning, exactly where I had left them, which sounds like a small thing and is not. I slept in the middle of the bed. I started getting up early on Saturday mornings and walking to the coffee place on Prentice Street that Daniel had always thought was too expensive, and I sat in the window with a cup that cost more than I would have allowed myself before, and I watched the street, and I was not managing anyone else's feelings, and the freedom of that, quiet, undramatic, simply and completely mine, was something I had not known I was missing until it came back to me. Sometime in March, 5 months after that Tuesday afternoon in the pharmacy parking lot, I rearranged the home office. I moved the desk to face the window. I put a small plant on the sill. I sat in the chair and looked out at the street and thought about the woman who had sat on the floor of that same room with a brown folder in her hands and felt the world contract around her. And I thought, she did the right things. She asked the right questions. She did not fold it up and put it away. The afternoon light came in at a good angle. The plant was doing well. My grandmother's account had its full balance again, and in a few weeks I thought I might finally spend some of it, not on anything that needed to be justified or explained or accounted for to anyone, but on something that was simply mine for no other reason than that I had kept it safe long enough to deserve it. I had been so careful for so long. It turned out that being careful was not the mistake. The mistake was being careful for the wrong people. I was done making that mistake, and the day ahead of me was clean and quiet, and it belonged entirely to me.